Sport Business. Global Sports Intelligence.
Hello and welcome to Inside the Deal, the new monthly podcast from Sport Business. My name is Frank Dunne, and each month I'll be taking an in-depth look at one deal from the industry. It could be media rights, it could be sponsorship, it could be a distribution deal, it could be hosting, it could be events, it could be tech, it could be something from any sector, any vertical in the industry. It won't necessarily be the most valuable deal that we have reported on that month, but it will be a deal that we think tells us something interesting about where the industry is and where it might be heading. In the first edition of Inside the Deal, I'm going to take a look at the domestic broadcasting agreement signed last month by the Saudi Pro League. And I'm joined by Jonathan Rest, the global news reporter of Sport Business. Welcome, John. How are you doing?
Hi, Frank. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Now, John, on June the 13th, you broke the news story that there was going to be a changing of the guard as far as the domestic broadcasting arrangements of the Saudi Pro League were concerned. You talked in your story about a three-horse race to win the rights between DAZN, the NBC Group, and a broadcaster called the Saudi Research and Media Group. Within a few days, it had been confirmed that SRMG was the winner. Now, up to that point, I have to be honest, I had never heard of SRMG. Probably shouldn't admit that, but there you go. So what can you tell us about who they are and how they won?
Yeah, I think you're not on your own with not knowing who they were, Frank. It took me some time to find out. Saudi Research and Media Group are one of the Middle East's largest media and publishing companies. It's publicly traded, not state-owned, and I'm sure we'll come on to that little nugget later. But they have a real lack of track record in live sport, and I think that's what really surprised us. The company was founded in 1972, and it's traditionally been news channels and print, and increasingly over the last few years in the podcast business as well. So, good on them. Now, who's going to be showing this is a company called Thamania. And now the extent of us not knowing who they were, it took us a long time to work out how to spell Thamania. Essentially, it's the Arabic for the number 8. So they're going to be showing the matches. It's a very youth-orientated channel. I think Thamania, I had a little look on their socials. They have 500,000 followers on X. I'm not sure if that's anything to be proud of nowadays. 670,000 on Instagram, 3.2 million followers on TikTok, and 1.15 million subscribers on YouTube. So we may not have heard of them, Frank, but I think the cool kids certainly have. And I think this really works to the big pitch of SRMG was the younger generation of Saudis accessing the league. And they certainly tick that box, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we heard, or we believe that they are paying about $120 million, the equivalent in Saudi riyals, a year. And that would be an increase of 50% on the previous deal with the Saudi sports company. So obviously they put down a big figure, but they were up against powerful rivals with DAZN, which is spending very heavily on sport, and NBC Group, which has in the past spent heavily on sport, things like Formula One. So did it just come down to them putting a higher figure, or was their pitch about this youth-orientated audience, was that critical? And the other factor, I guess, is that we hear that they will be doing a lot on free-to-air, whereas my understanding is that Saudi Sports Company, everything is pretty much behind a paywall. So how did it break down in terms of, their strength of their financial offer vis-a-vis their rivals, and also their commitment to the widest possible kind of reach for the league?
Yeah, just to kind of unpack the deal, as you mentioned the value there, it's a 6-year deal, 25-26 to 30-31, and it's not just Saudi Arabia, it is, pan across the Middle East and North Africa region. So a kind of a new player maybe coming into that competitive market. The free element is really important, so all the games are going to be free in standard definition on Thamania. The same matches will be available on a high definition 4K offering, which will be a subscription platform. And I think, as you will know more than me, the ITT, when it was launched, I believe had a requirement for at least one match a week to be shown free. And actually, they've smashed that. They have not launched this platform yet, this paid platform. It's going to be, I believe, August the 8th before the new season. Pricing hasn't been revealed yet. But of course, all games are free, bar the fact that you won't get all the bells and whistles that you'd get from a paid service. I think that free element is more the youth element, as I talked about with their numbers, is super important. If you look at what the Saudi Pro League has done, let's call it kind of PR, post Ronaldo, if you like. It's, that digital youth audience. It's carving out more and more rights for digital distribution on digital channels. They've got deals with the likes of OneFootball, TikTok, 433 Football, another platform. A lot of non-live content lives on YouTube as well. So, we're not privy to the conversations that were had, but it may be that some of the other bidders were less likely to allow that freedom of coverage, if you like, on other platforms. We don't know. We can only assume that looking at where the Saudi Pro League sees its audience globally with the players that they have on board, its younger audiences and where they live in. And we've talked about before, and on the sister podcast, you did, Frank, on YouTube and its 30 years and what it does now in sport. So I think that's why them. I think the big surprise is when I wrote this story some 48 hours before the deals were announced, we had it was between Thamania, we had it as Saudi Research and Media Group. At that point, we'd never even heard of Thamania, and that was when we had learned of the shortlisted trio. We had this DAZN, MENA, the joint venture with Serge, and then NBC Group. And when I wrote that story, it was a Friday, published it around, 4 p.m. UK time. And I had, within 2 hours, my WhatsApp messages from people going, great story. We all know where that's going, don't we? Another DAZN deal. And it wasn't. And that was really the big shock, that DAZN, given all the background, didn't get these rights.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the moment there's been a lot of speculation about the relationship between DAZN and the Saudis. And obviously, we've been tracking this now for several years, and we know that over the last 2 to 3 years, DAZN has made a really clear attempt to court the Saudis, to court Saudi investment, to try to become almost a de facto broadcast partner for Saudi sport. And so it did look as though it was heading in a direction. It did make sense. And I think there are two interesting things about this. The first thing that struck me is that this commitment to free-to-air kind of strikes me that it's maybe a cycle too late. I'm slightly baffled that last time around they went certainly across Saudi Arabia, with a pay offering. I mean, the Saudi Pro League, we know it in some shape or form. There's been a professional football league in Saudi Arabia since the 1950s. I think that the name Saudi Pro League, that brand, has existed since 2008, but there is a long history of football there. But I think we need to think of the Saudi Pro League as being something almost completely new from 2023. That's when it came into the Vision 2030. That's when they started they signed Ronaldo. They started to sign top players from around the world. And I would say that for most of us, that's when it came on our radar as a football league with these great ambitions. So it struck me as very odd that in that moment, when you're trying to effectively break something which is a new product, that they went behind a paywall. So I don't know whether DAZN, we've seen the Club World Cup, and we've seen that DAZN has the ability, if it wants to put something out there free to air. That's what it's doing with the Club World Cup. So it could have done that. So for me, there's just a few surprises in there. One is that it's taken them this amount of time to realize that they've got to go free to air to break, even in their own country, which is a football mad country, as we know, to reach that youth audience. But secondly, I guess that, that they had this rival in DAZN that could theoretically have done the same thing. Is that a surprise to you as well?
Yeah, massively. I just say, I think maybe we're guilty of kind of looking at the wider DAZN picture with the Club World Cup and the Saudi investment that's gone into DAZN and just thinking, oh, well, that naturally means, they're going to put any bid in and they'll get the league rights. I actually think it's quite healthy, Frank, that we're talking about of it not being DAZN, of a new player coming in and clearly putting down the money that the league feels is the right amount to take this league forward, but also with a free-to-air element. And it's not tarnished is the wrong word, but it's not associated with the state, if you like. This is not a state-owned media group. And I think that is really important when we talk about and look at the league as a whole and the privatization plans that they have, that this is this is an outside entity. Yes, it's kind of Saudi based, if you like, but they're a Middle East wide company, and they are, they're not owned by the state. I think that's super interesting.
Yeah, because obviously DAZN PIF has a small stake. We think about 5%. NBC Group, the PIF has a controlling majority stake. Yeah, so I mean, this is a private entity beating two state-funded entities. So is your view then that this deal, this choice of SRMG, has to be seen within the context of this so-called privatization? And I think up to now we've used that term kind of in inverted commas, because when the Saudi Pro League talks about privatization, the first step in that was PIF taking a stake in 4 clubs. Now, behind the scenes, there is a lot going on. There are talks with private equity companies. We understand Cristiano Ronaldo taking a stake in a club, which is the first, as far as I'm aware, it's the first non-Saudi investment in an SPL club. So is that the right context to understand this deal? That this is the bigger picture is that the Saudi government, MBS, they want to make Saudi football a standalone commercial operation, the whole ecosystem, the broadcasting, the clubs. And so is that the kind of real context for why they beat these 2 other rivals?
I think it's a really key element of it. Yeah, I mean, we kind of laughed, didn't we, when I think it was a couple of years ago when they came out and said, yeah, we're going to allow private money into football. These are the first 4 clubs it's happened to, and they're all now owned by PIF. And it's not really a true privatization, is it? And over the course of the last 48 months, different teams have been released, if you like, to the market to be able to take on investment. Now, as we understand it, I don't think there's been any outside investment yet into a Saudi team. You mentioned Ronaldo as part of his contract, but we haven't seen a CVC or an Arctos or an Ares that are kind of everywhere in certainly US sport now and European football. We haven't seen any of them come in yet, but certainly they are open to this now, we think. And I think that that was what really struck me, was that maybe that this privatization plan now is kind of going to really take off. And the reason, we know why they've focused on football. They talk about the Vision 2030 and kind of moving the economy away from the reliance on, the oil. But I think they're aware that there needs to be revenue streams coming in to make this a legitimate football league worldwide. So I think that's one of the reasons. What I think would be interesting to ask you, actually, Frank, for your years of knowing these industries and covering European football deals in particular, they are absolutely essential to the way a team budgets for the year, right? So if you look at what happens in the Bundesliga, they need everything sorted out in November before, the carve up of the TV money so clubs can budget. You look at what's happening in France with Liga, where I was talking to a club executive a couple of days ago, just over WhatsApp. I was like, how's things going? And he said, I can't plan anything. There's a player I want to buy and I have no idea how much money I've got. Now, in Saudi, it's slightly different, right? This money, it's good money when you compare it with other leagues around the world, but it's not the be all and end all for these clubs, is it? It's not how they're going to live and die by the amount of TV money they get.
No, absolutely not. I mean, I think $120 million a season certainly isn't putting them into the realms of the top earning leagues for media rights around the world. Far from it. And I think we're used to seeing football leagues, if you look at like the Deloitte report or any kind of analysis of football finances, we're used to thinking in terms of these 3 verticals of media rights, sponsorship and match day revenue. And clubs have been basically, most football clubs, certainly in Europe, they build around those 3 verticals. And media rights traditionally has been the biggest of those 3 verticals. Now, if you look at the SPL, had a slightly different business model up to now, because media rights, they haven't relied on it in the same way that the other clubs around the world. The government and the league, they have this central pot of money, which is the player acquisition fund. And with these kind of media rights revenues or these kind of sponsorship revenues, even match day revenue, you can't go out and buy the best players in the world. You can't go out and offer these salaries. So that's been a critical difference. But I think that On the question of media rights and the value of media rights, I think it opens up a much broader and to me very interesting question as to what this company is, what their ambitions are, what they represent in the media rights market. Because I think we've all tracked in the last 5 or 6 years, or maybe even longer, the market in the Middle East, and it's been it's been a very healthy market, a lot of money spent, and since about 2012, 2013, we've seen the rise of beIN Media. We certainly saw that for a decade. Heavy spending, buying up all the rights, becoming the most powerful broadcaster across the Middle East and North Africa. And then we had that whole period around 2019. So in the wake of the blockade, the economic blockade, the whole piracy issue, and then together with a rationalization and a maturation of their business, we've seen a complete repositioning in terms of spending of beIN. And that has led to, you talked about Bundesliga and other leagues, that repositioning of beIN Media, as we know, led to serious problems for football leagues. The Bundesliga, the Serie A, that left a massive hole in their revenue, their media rights revenue, that key vertical, international rights revenue. I'm wondering whether the emergence of SRMG, which at the moment is, a domestic player, they've got the rights across the Middle East and North Africa. We don't know of any ambitions beyond that. But could this be the player that everybody's been waiting for in the last few years? Because I think if you go back to that period when beIN stopped spending those astronomical amounts of money to buy Premier League, Champions League, Serie A, Bundesliga, everything they could get their hands on. The big question was, okay, who's going to fill the vacuum? That's been the big question since then. And I think that Saudi Sports Company, when that was founded, people said, this is it. And it hasn't been. When NBC in 2019 bought the rights across the region to Formula One, people said, okay, it's NBC. This is the new player. This is the one who's going to take things forward. And it hasn't been. I mean, just to take Formula One, those rights are now back with beIN. Is it possible, do you think, that SRMG is this new player that everybody's been waiting for? Or do you think it's more likely that their ambitions are going to be much more circumscribed? Basically, they've got this property, they've got the domestic league, they're really committed to it, and that's going to be it.
Yeah, I think probably a bit more the latter. Just as we mentioned at the very start, they have no track record in live sport really before. So this was a total, came out the blue. So I think right now, I think they're going to look at, the first maybe year of this deal. What are the subscriber numbers if they're up, if they're showing it for free? How many people are actually signing up and paying whatever they're going to pay to get it in 4K? Build a base. I think they'll certainly look at, this is going to be really popular in Saudi Arabia. What's it like in Middle East and North Africa? What's the kind of buy-in, and make kind of strategic decisions based on that. Now they are, they're not state-owned, so they're not beholden to others telling them what to do, if you like. What is the right move politically, geopolitically for this organisation? They are publicly traded, so their decisions are going to come in out of a different way of thinking. I think beIN is still that kind of dominant player, as you mentioned. And actually, when we've written stories in the past about we have news meetings and we talk about, this story's happened today, and you're kind of like, well, it's a beIN renewal. How newsworthy is another renewal for that league with beIN? They've been with them for 20 years. So it'd be great to see some actual competition. But you mentioned some of the names there that not so much came and gone, but certainly didn't maybe make the big push that we expected them to. And actually, you mentioned a company there that I wanted to throw back at you, Frank, was guys that had the rights before here, Saudi Sports Co. I mean, what happened there? Why weren't they not even shortlisted? Was it purely because they just showed the league pay only and that was not the way the league wanted to go? Or what happened to them?
We haven't really been able to get any clarity on why they didn't make the shortlist. Our understanding when they were formed, what was being said at the time, was that this was going to be the big new platform. Now, the idea was not that it was going to be an international player, as beIN became, with chasing media rights around the world, in Australia, America, wherever. It was never going to be that. But the intention was that this was going to be the main domestic platform for sport. And it hasn't really become that. Now, the process, what we've been able to learn from what we've heard from people on the ground over there, is that it was a very long process, that this took months. So whether they were in there at the very beginning and then gradually fell away, we don't know. But we do know that when it got to the final stage, they were no longer in the picture. That tells me that whatever plans there had been around 2020, 21, 22, when the country with the government was thinking about creating a new platform, that suggests to me that that's all gone. So I don't know what the future is for this company, but I don't get the feeling that it's going to be a really important player going forward, either domestically in Saudi Arabia or across the region.
I also wanted to ask you about, well, one thing we should definitely talk about is the international rights picture, because you mentioned the 120 million US dollars a year. That puts them, we think, kind of above Belgium, below Netherlands, if you're looking at European mid-level in terms of TV money, not the quality of the league, the TV money. Now, I can barely watch a Dutch game. It's not readily available in the UK. So the Saudi Pro League have obviously got all the big names there, maybe, slightly aging names, but their international has obviously been a big part of their pitch. What are we hearing on the international rights? Who's selling them and where are they going to sell them to?
As far as we know at the moment, there's no confirmation. Nothing. We've not seen anything. We've not heard anything official or formal about a decision being taken. But everything we're hearing is pointing to a renewal for IMG. IMG was brought in at very short notice when Ronaldo signed for Al Nassr. And that was halfway through a season. And their brief at that time was simply just to go out and get some coverage for the second half of the season. Then their deal was renewed. The league talked to a couple of other players, but it was renewed with IMG. And they went out and they did deals around the world from 23 to 25. That deal is now expiring. But they got pretty good coverage, I would say, around the world. I mean, I think in revenue terms, what we understand is that they earned about $15 million per season for that distribution. But that wasn't really what it was about. It was about exposure. It was about reach. It was about coverage. It was about getting as many broadcast deals with as many strong partners as possible. And they did get some really strong deals across Asia with Spo TV. They got a multi-territory deal with DAZN, which I would expect to be renewed. And they got deals pretty much in every major market in the world. Now, what we're hearing is that IMG will be renewed again through to 2029. The value that we're hearing is about 20 million. So not a massive uplift, a small uplift from the last deal. But again, I think that the role of IMG is because they've got this incredible distribution network around the world. And also probably worth pointing out that IMG has been handling the match production and distribution of the signal. They've got that deal. They will have that deal for the same period. Now, those two will be coterminous. So IMG will be handling all of that side, match production and distribution of the signal, through to 2029. That's not confirmed, but that's how we think it's going to go. And I would suggest that suggests that the SPL is pretty happy with the degree of exposure and promotion and commitment to the league that these broadcasters around the world have been giving. I think that the question of where they end up depends very heavily on how long the government continues to support this central fund. What we hear is that it's ring-fenced at least until the World Cup. And for me, the future of the Saudi Pro League, the idea of it making that leap into the top 10 football leagues in the world, I think they still need to continue with that fund after the World Cup through maybe to 2030 or even to 2034. But clearly, if they do that, then that means they're sacrificing their idea of privatization or putting the league on the normal commercial footing that every other league in the world is on, because that would give the Saudi Pro League clubs a huge advantage. It would give them the ability to buy players from anywhere in the world. So for me, where they end up depends on that decision, which I guess we won't know until the World Cup is over.
Yeah, I think the World Cup is, I guess now is Saudi Pro League, 2.0, I guess, if you like. And I think the World Cup is going to be a real kind of statement as to where this league goes from there. Is it what Qatar was, which was like a showpiece and then everyone kind of left the party? Or I don't think it is with Saudi. This is a league with decades of fan rivalry and proper football culture. I think it'll just be, does it need to does it live and die by the likes of, big names being there, or can it sustain itself? Because I think from a commercial point of view at the moment, it's sustaining itself, but how much of that is on the back of the likes of Cristiano Ronaldo and the top players that are going there, and how much of it can live on its own? I think 34 will be the key point in that.
Excellent. Okay, well, thanks, John. That's all we have time for today. That was the first edition of Inside the Deal. We'll be back every month with a new deal. If you want more information about our database and our coverage of sports rights deals, you can have a look on our website or email us at info@sportbusiness.com. Thanks for listening. Enjoy your day.